Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys. This hat has seen better days, but I still love it. It's still mine. Let's go. My name's Connor if you're new. Hope everyone's doing well. Why is it 50 seconds in? Who really won the jet race? It's complicated. Imperial War Museums, the original link to the video, top of the description as always. Hope everyone's doing well. Let's learn. The Germans were first, right?
This is the Gloucester Meteor, the first ever jet aircraft to enter squadron service. It was the culmination of British efforts to win a top-secret race that lasted the entire Second World War, the race for speed. As soldiers fought on battlefields across the world, British and German engineers went head-to-head in a battle to build an engine that would change aerial warfare forever.
People are so smart. Yes. I agree. Seems about right.
Since 1914, aircraft have been used as a successful weapon of war, and throughout the Second World War they used traditional piston engines. But this technology was reaching its limits. Over the course of the development of the Spitfire, the horsepower of the engine doubled from around 1,000 horsepower in the Mark I to over 2,000 horsepower in the Mark 24, like this. But the top speed only increased from around 360 to 450 miles per hour. To develop the next generation of aircraft, an entirely new engine would be required, the jet engine. Simply put, while a propeller pulls an aircraft through the air, a jet engine pushes an aircraft forward by ejecting a superheated blast, or jet, of air. A jet engine has far fewer moving parts than a piston engine and is much more energy efficient. Therefore, it can propel an aircraft much faster than that of a propeller. However, there was a problem.
I wonder if even if you could get a propeller aircraft to go a certain speed, would you get to a point where the propellers would just start turning like one of those little plastic windmills you'd have as a little kid, like at a parade, and just...
Before the Second World War,
stupid question.
than that of a propeller. However, there was a problem. Before the Second World War, very few people even believed they would work. It would take the work of two visionary young engineers to turn the theory into reality.
Sorry.
On the British side was Frank Whittle, an RAF officer who'd had his first jet engine patent granted in 1932. On the German side was Hans von Ohain, a physics and maths student who had their first patent in 1934. At first they struggled. Despite both testing their first jet engines in 1937, they found little government support for their ideas, and Whittle in particular suffered from a lack of funds. But as Europe marched to war in 1939, everything changed, and the race for the jet truly began. Now their work became a closely guarded secret, with neither side aware of each other's early success. It was now that the Germans surged ahead.
There's proof right there that war isn't a good thing, obviously, but you wouldn't have jet travel as it is today if there wasn't the war, because just like that example, they didn't have the funding until wartime came around, and they thought it necessary to start experimenting with that. So
completed the first,
just like with like rockets and then eventual space travel, and wars, not a good thing, but sometimes good technology comes out of it.
It was now that the Germans surged ahead. They completed the first solely jet-powered flight of the Heinkel HG-178 on the 27th of August 1939, 5 days before the outbreak of war. It took the British nearly 2 years to make their first jet aircraft flight in May 1941, with the Gloucester E-2839. Both Whittle and his German competitors were satisfied with their success. However, more power and more speed was needed to build a functioning jet-powered warplane.
How did you get to know Frank Whittle?
He was always extremely keen to come and fly the first jet aircraft, which after all had his engine in it. But we had been briefed that under no circumstances was he to be allowed to fly it. You can't lose your top aircraft and your top man at the same time. We were able to stop him by, shall I say, finagling around and pretending the aircraft was unserviceable, but he did indeed fly the second of the jets, the Meteor.
An early problem with jet engine design was the compressor system. Compressors are vital because they make the air more dense and therefore more efficient. Early jet engines, known as centrifugal flow engines, had a problem that they required a wide and aerodynamically inefficient forward air intake before the air was passed through the combustion chamber. These engines have been used on both the HE-178 and Gloucester E-2839. But the German Junkers Jumo 004 engine solved these problems. Junkers designed an axial flow compressor, which used a sequence of rotor blades to crush the air. Whilst this in itself was not as powerful as the centrifugal flow engine,
how do the sequence of rotor blades crush the air? What? Wouldn't the air just going through a smaller, like a funnel-like design, crush the air on itself? What? How does? What? How do? I'm confused as to whether it's the air coming in that actually drives these fan-like things here, the compressors, or if the compressors are already moving and they're just, well, they're compressing the air. Okay, it's not crucial enough for me to get stuck up on this.
Whilst this in itself was not as powerful as the centrifugal flow engine, compressing the air multiple times in stages made for a more compact and aerodynamic design. Despite the success of the groundbreaking Junkers Jumo 004 engine, O'Hine continued to work on his centrifugal designs, which would never be put into production.
Okay, wait. So these are acting like fan blades to suck air in, right? Is that what these do?
Made for a more compact and aerodynamic design. Despite the success of the groundbreaking Junkers Jumo 004 engine, O'Hine continued to work on his centrifugal designs, which would never be put into production. His importance in the jet race began to subside. Eventually, it was Messerschmitt who took the lead with the development of the ME-262, built around two Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets. These were the first turbojet engines to go into mass production. Each engine produced 840 kilograms, 1,852 pounds of thrust. The ME-262 was one of the most important developments in aircraft technology of the 20th century. The ME-262 featured a number of innovations, including a tricycle landing gear arrangement with the smaller nose wheel out front rather than a tail wheel, and advanced swept-back wings for greater high-speed performance. Top speed was around 540 miles per hour, about 120 miles per hour faster than the best Allied piston engine fighters of the time. Yet the Germans wavered. It was not until towards the end of 1943 that the ME-262 program was accelerated into production. Even worse, much to the Luftwaffe's frustration, Adolf Hitler meddled in development, insisting that it was built as a dual-role fighter-bomber aircraft. This added serious complications to the aircraft's design.
I swear the Swift, his ego got too big with the Swift takeover of France, and then from then on, I think he's like, oh, look how great that was, and I think he had some part in designing the initial through the Ardennes blitzkrieg through the Ardennes, and then just thought like, hey, I'm gonna put my hands in everything. Invasion of the Soviet Union, that's me, and then failed.
And compromised its acceleration and speed.
It was like talking about football. Nowadays you have a Premier League, which is something extra right above. The only aircraft in that league was the Me-262. It was really a formidable aeroplane. Very fast, heavily armed, nothing could really get near it. In many ways I sit back and think it's just as well the war ended when it did.
Meanwhile, Frank Whittle's team at the Gloucester Aircraft Company were pressing ahead with the first British jet fighter, the Gloucester Meteor. The Meteor was built as a slightly simpler design than the Me-262, with conventional straight wings and built purely as a fighter aircraft, not yet as a fighter bomber. This more conservative design was about 150 miles per hour slower than the Me-262 to start with, at about 415 miles per hour speed. However, by 1946, just after the Second World War, an updated Meteor beat speeds of over 600 miles per hour. The Gloucester Meteor entered service with the Royal Air Force with 161 Squadron in July 1944, beating the Germans by 3 months, who didn't introduce the Me-262 into service until October that year. The Germans had squandered their early advantage. However, these two iconic aircraft would never meet in battle. So as to prevent the possibility of any aircraft falling into enemy hands, the Gloucester Meteor was restricted to usage in British airspace. Its primary target was shooting down German V-1 Doodlebug flying bombs, primitive German cruise missiles.
Today, every jet in the world almost is axial flow, whereas with the
restricted to usage in British airspace. Its primary target was shooting down German V-1 Doodlebug flying bombs, primitive German cruise missiles.
Today,
the Germans were ahead of their time, huh?
Every jet in the world.
Primitive German cruise missiles.
Today, every jet in the world almost is axial flow, whereas the British went along the centrifugal flow. At that stage in the war, the centrifugal flow engine was much more reliable than the axial flow. And the German engines had a total scrap life of 25 hours, which is quite ridiculous. But in the end, the axial flow is the way to go if you wish to develop the engine to its ultimate.
A scrap life of 25 hours, it said? So you could only use it for 25 hours and then it's useless? Is that what that means?
This extraordinary-looking fuselage, currently undergoing restoration, was another early German jet fighter, the Heinkel HE-162, the Volksjäger.
What the heck? You ever, of course, yeah, come on, everyone's done this. Like you stick your hand out the car window when you're on the highway and it like you ever try and sometimes find the perfect angle of your arm so that like your arm is just think of the force of the wind at just like 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, or whatever that is in kilometers, like 80 kilometers an hour. Imagine the amount of force that is, see, when the flap, it could be on anything. You turn the flap to help turn the plane or whatever, the back tail flaps. Imagine that the force of the air at 10 times the speed that you witness in a car, just hitting that. I don't know how it wouldn't just get completely blown off or anything could stand that sort of pressure.
Or People's Fighter. Ours is currently undergoing a full forensic restoration to help determine the aircraft's full identity. Developed by Messerschmitt's German rivals Heinkel, this was a much simpler and cheaper aircraft than the Me-262. Essentially a light fuselage with a small but powerful BMW 003 turbojet fitted on top. As the Germans were facing defeat towards the end of the Second World War, in their desperation, extraordinary yet ineffective weapon systems were developed, often to the detriment of their wider war effort. The Volksjäger was one such example. First flown in spring 1945, towards the end of the war, it was intended that this simple jet fighter could be flown by air cadets and volunteers with minimal training. Such was the lack of qualified German Air Force pilots by the end of the war. However, unlike the complex Me-262, the HE-162 was a very difficult aircraft to fly and proved a death trap to its inexperienced pilots. The jet aircraft was seen more as a German propaganda tool rather than a viable jet fighter.
A very fast airplane, almost as fast as the Messerschmitt 262, but cleared into combat.
It looks like one of those Looney Tunes, like Wile E. Coyote would just have a giant rocket strapped to the back, and he's like on his cart and just light it and fly. It's what it looks like.
Fast airplane, almost as fast as the Messerschmitt 262, but cleared into combat virtually without any advanced flight testing at all. So we were left with a very interesting phase at the end of the war where we knew the potential of the German aircraft was far higher than ours, but we had no data. This really was a very illuminating and quite exciting time.
Hey, there he is. There's our boy, Werner. Thanks for the space program, brother.
The engine was one of the engineering marvels to emerge from the Second World War. It allowed aircraft to fly faster and climb higher than ever before. But in many ways, the most
Sorry, guys. This is Werner von Braun, who was a Nazi rocket scientist who Americans
quite exciting.
Snacked up. Like when World War II was over, a lot of Soviet and Americans tried to get all the good German scientists. He was one of them that the Americans got. Helped us in our space program with rocket technology and stuff.
The jet engine was one of the engineering marvels to emerge from the Second World War. It allowed aircraft to fly faster and climb higher than ever before. But in many ways, the most important aircraft in the development of the jet engine was not a fighter or a bomber. It was an airliner. The jet engine allowed the world to open up to truly global air travel, and the pioneer jet airliner was the de Havilland Comet. This was the world's first commercial jet airliner, fitted with 4 de Havilland Ghost turbojets and with swept-backed wing, first harking back to the German Me-262. The Comet was the culmination of wartime jet aircraft design, designed with a comfortable pressurized cabin derived from the high-altitude B-29 bomber of the Second World War. The Comet could fly faster, higher and further than many of the older piston-engined airliners. But unfortunately, the Comet program was significantly curtailed by 3 disastrous air crashes during its first years in service, with tragic loss of life. The aircraft had fallen victim to the then unknown concept of metal fatigue in the aircraft fuselage, causing catastrophic mid-air failure of the aircraft. These disastrous problems were later solved. However, the revolutionary Comet would never rise to be the commercial success and global airliner the British hoped it would.
Why were they unaware of the wear and tear on the fuselage? Wouldn't there be wear and tear on propeller-driven fuselages as well? Just maybe not as quickly because they didn't go as fast. But that's...
Commercial success would go ultimately to the Americans when US bomber manufacturer Boeing introduced the 707 airliner in 1958. This larger, cheaper, more efficient, and arguably safer aircraft in the eyes of the public would go on to change the world of global air travel.
I still get, like, it's hard not to get, like, a little tinge of nervousness when I've been on a plane many times. There are definitely many people who have, I don't know, 20-something, maybe 30 times or something like that. I don't know. But something about just having no control over your fate, no matter what statistic you tell me, it's like... Like, oh, sharks don't hunt for humans, you know, that's a myth. It's like, I'm not going to test it out. You know, I'm going away from the main point of the video. Fascinating, really smart people, and dire circumstances combined with resources end up with great innovations. So really interesting. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below, and hopefully I'll see you next video. Bye, guys.